York team is saying that the jury has reached a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, but they do remain deadlocked on count 1. The defense, though, urging them to continue deliberating rather than deliver a partial verdict. As of right now, I do want to go over the latest information that is coming in, again, from our different affiliates that are there inside of the courtroom. Cameras not allowed inside, but those reporters are providing up-to-the-minute information here. We do know that at 10:30 this morning, the jury sent another note to the judge. The judge was waiting for everyone to return to the courtroom before about an hour later saying that they want to hear Cassandra Cassie Ventura's testimony regarding the Intercontinental Hotel cans and freak-offs with Daniel Phillip. The jury also wanted testimony from Daniel Phillip regarding Cassie Ventura. Now, the jury will not be brought out until an agreement has been reached on those testimonies. But again, we know that a partial verdict has now been reached there. Instructions were read to the jury Monday, with deliberation starting around 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And about 1 hour in, the foreperson actually reported that one of the 12 jurors might be having trouble following the 61 pages worth of instructions that the judge had just read to them. In a note to the judge around 12:30 in the afternoon, the foreperson wrote, quote, "We are concerned the juror cannot follow your honor's instructions." 3 hours later, the jury sent another note asking for clarification on the part of the instructions addressing drug distribution, an allegation included in Diddy's racketeering conspiracy charge. During the deliberation, Diddy was seen praying with his family and friends in the courtroom. Now, it does appear the one count that they are not able to fully come to a verdict on is actually the racketeering conspiracy charge. However, we know that that partial verdict has been reached on the part of the other 4 counts, because, again, he does face those 5 counts there. Diddy has pleaded not guilty to federal charges of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking relating to 2 of his ex-girlfriends, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution based on allegations that he arranged to fly sex workers across state lines. Popping this up from our friends over at TMZ, they just posted this a short time ago saying the verdict is in for Diddy's federal criminal trial. Story developing, so they don't have a full story just yet. But again, what we do know coming in from our Fox 5 New York team is that essentially they reached a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, but were unable to reach a verdict on count 1, which is the racketeering conspiracy charge. Essentially, jurors at this point are going to continue to debate as the defense decides with the judge here what is going to happen next. The defense is arguing that we should get all of the different counts decided, a full verdict before it is read out to the courtroom. However, anything could happen at this point. We are waiting on that decision. But today, believe it or not, was just the second day of jury deliberations in that trial that's been going on now for about 8 weeks. Jurors did deliberate for over 5 hours without reaching a verdict on Monday. We know they started again very early this morning, and it now appears they do have that partial verdict. We know that Diddy does face 5 charges, including sex trafficking, and he has pleaded not guilty to all of those charges. Not a lot of activity that we're seeing at this hour outside of the courthouse itself. I know I've told you this several times, but I do want to remind you that cameras are not allowed inside. They are only allowed outside. However, reporters can go inside. So at this point, we are keeping an eye on the situation. A lot of these notes are coming in, so I'm reading them in real time. We do know we have the partial verdict in the trial, the verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, but they were unable to reach a verdict on count 1. As there's jurors with unpersuadable opinions on both sides here. Again, all of this is developing at this hour, so we are working to continue to get more. Now, after the jury reported a partial verdict, both prosecution and defense have asked the judge to recall the panel and urge them to continue working toward agreement. So it does sound as though both the defense and the prosecution are in agreement that they should continue to get this full verdict before they do actually read it out, meaning that we would not get the verdict on counts 2 through 5 until they can decide on count 1. The defense attorney telling the court they will collaborate on the exact language for the judge's instruction to bring the jury back and press them to keep deliberating. All right, we do have our very own Andy Mack is working with experts here as he is going to be taking over shortly. Nima Rahmani, who is a great friend of the show, will be joining him to kind of break down all of this information here. But if you are just joining us, this is breaking news at this hour. Second day of jury deliberations in the Diddy trial, with the jurors deliberating yesterday for 5 hours, not coming to a verdict here. But we have now learned within the last 30 minutes or so, we did get a partial verdict in this trial. That includes counts 2 through 5. However, count 1, that is that racketeering charge. We do have no decision made. We're told that they are kind of split on that decision. So essentially, we're just waiting to see if the judge does decide that they have to go back and continue kind of debating this before they do get a full verdict, and then that can be read over to the actual courtroom there. Now, I do want to go over again just some of the charges that he faces, because Diddy has pleaded not guilty to those federal charges of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking related to 2 of his ex-girlfriends, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution based on allegations that he arranged to fly sex workers across state lines. The jury is made up of 8 men and 4 women and will now decide his fate as they comb through 7 weeks of testimony, including the discussion there of drug-fueled sex marathons that were dubbed freak-offs and hotel nights. If found guilty, Diddy does face the possibility there of life in prison. Again, you can see not a lot of activity outside of the New York City courtroom where all of this is happening inside. Unfortunately, while we do get the different artist renderings, the drawings that come in from inside the courtroom, we are not able to get a camera inside. That is just kind of the rules of the situation there. Now, we do know that our Fox 5 New York team is on this. They're watching it very closely. I do want to head over to their coverage here in just a matter of seconds as we wait to see if the partial verdict itself will be read or if we will get a full verdict, essentially sending the jury back to finish on essentially that last charge, count 1, the racketeering charge. So let's lift up the audio here and listen in.
On that right now.
Yeah. So Arthur, let's just remind our viewers who might be just joining our live stream here from the Lower Manhattan studio that, Sean Combs, known as P. Diddy, facing 5 felony counts, 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking, 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, in a long and trial where we learned a lot about this mogul and his personal lifestyle, and that, of course, was part of the defense, right? They were saying, well, you may not like what you heard about how he acted, but the defense argued all this was consensual as we listened to what unfolded over the last couple of weeks, right?
The jury have.
Right, they even went a step further. Was he a domestic violence? Did he commit domestic violence? Yes, that harrowing video from that Los Angeles hotel showed yes, right? And they even said, right, his life is ugly, but is it a federal crime? They did not argue that there were certain facts in this case. It was just a perspective, and they did not call a single witness, including Mr. Combs. All the witnesses in this case, about 3 dozen of them, were entirely called by the prosecution. So that was the approach, which is we don't disagree. It's about whether or not this was a federal crime.
And let's talk a little bit about the prosecution and what they laid out over the course of weeks and all of those witnesses. Of course, their key witness, so unique, Cassie Ventura, they wanted to get her on the stand because she was about to give birth to a baby, and she, of course, was central to this, and the woman, of course, seen in that video over and over again. Let's talk a little bit about the prosecution's case.
The prosecution's case was that Sean Diddy Combs used his power and influence in order to create this one-man racketeering operation. Because of his overwhelming power, because of the money that he had, he was able to create this enterprise. That is their main contention. Those are the witnesses that they called. They were like, I was under pressure. I had to do it. Look at how powerful he is. If I want to succeed, succeed in the music industry, much like with the Weinstein case just a block from here, I had to do it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that influence that he seemed to wield over not just the alleged victims who testified, but also all of the handlers, all of the people who worked for him, creating that conspiracy, that criminal network, as prosecutors described it, and that what went on for years and years, and in these so-called coerced freak-offs that went on, days-long sex sessions that the victims say, the alleged victims say they were forced into, and of course the defense says they weren't forced into it. It was consensual, that some of the people who testified during this trial were still getting their rent paid by P. Diddy and other things like that. Just bring our viewers up to speed. The reason we're talking about the case in this way is we've just heard from the jury, and we're expecting, do you have any timeline, Arthur, as to when we will get more clarification on how the counts were handed out?
Well, we will find out shortly in the 5 o'clock newscast, because Lisa Evers just came out of the federal courthouse right now. She will tell us where those things stand. Again.
All right, so you are watching there our Fox 5 New York coverage. You can hear someone kind of screaming behind the reporter there. But if you are just joining us, we do have a partial verdict that has been reached in the Diddy sex trafficking trial, counts 2 through 5. However, there is no verdict, as you see there, on count 1. That is the racketeering charge. We are waiting to see exactly what the judge decides, if they want to read out that partial verdict, or if they do want to wait for count 1. However, we are hearing from Fox News that they might actually be reading out that partial verdict here any moment. Again, a lot of information here is just coming in, so we're checking in with our Fox 5 New York team as well as Fox News. Let's lift the audio back up, as it looks like they are finished with the person who was screaming there in the background.
And just like with Weinstein, the defense has said that the women who were the alleged victims stayed in contact with them. They were not children. They were not, except for at least one, they were not young. They were adults. They were full-on adults, but they still made the decision to stick with him. And how that weighs on the jury's decision, we look at it: 8 men, 4 women, most of the women professional or careers. How will they view the fact that these women stayed in that orbit? That's a key here, we think.
All right, Arthur, thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up there for you now, and keep it right here, because we'll give you updates as soon as they become available.
All right.
All right, so again, we are getting this information here coming in, if you are just joining us, as we did learn that the jury has reached a partial verdict in the Diddy sex trafficking trial that we have been covering here for about 8 weeks. There was 7 weeks of testimony, and today was just day 2 of jury deliberations. Not even a complete day just yet. They have reached a verdict, we're told, on counts 2 through 5. However, count 1, they have not been able to come to an agreement, as we are told that the jurors do have strong opinions on each side of that argument. Now, we are told, Fox News is reporting here, that the partial verdict could be read any moment now. However, all of that is unclear, because all of it is developing at this hour. But we know that the jury has reached a partial verdict. They are still working to get a verdict on that racketeering charge. If we do get any more information coming in from Fox News or Fox 5 New York, we are going to make sure to bring that to you right here on Live Now from Fox. But once again, taking a live look outside of the courthouse here in New York as all of this is developing. My name is Josh Breslow, and I've been here for the past several hours. My understanding here is that my colleague Andy Mack does have Nima Rahmani, a friend of the show, who is standing by with him to help break down all of this. I'm going to turn down the audio here for just a second, and they will pick up the stream in, I would say, a matter of seconds with all of that information. You're watching Live Now from Fox. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. You're looking live there in New York City as we're continuing to follow this bombshell news that the jury has reached at least a partial verdict in this Sean Diddy Combs trial there in the heart of New York City. As we're learning the latest, thanks to my colleague Josh Breslow for guiding us the last several hours, we're still trying to grapple with what exactly this means, as those 5 charges the music mogul faces include RICO, racketeering, also sex trafficking. So you can see just a couple live shots right now outside of the courtroom. We'll see if anyone talks about this as it comes here just past now 5 o'clock on the East Coast. Let's continue on to dissect some of these, because as we know, 2, 3, 4, and 5, reportedly the jury reaching a verdict on this, and the defense and prosecution also pushing the jury to try to find a consensus on that first charge, that racketeering, that RICO charge. So we're following it here on Live Now from Fox. I'm going to take you right now out to our Fox 5 team there in New York that's diving into the latest.
In this case, let's get right to Fox 5's Lisa Evers outside the courthouse following the developments. Lisa, we're hearing that the defense is fighting to keep the jury in deliberations right now, not taking a partial verdict. There's no verdict on count 1, which is the most serious charge of racketeering conspiracy. What are you hearing?
Well, right now it appears that both the prosecution and the defense are fighting to keep that jury to continue deliberating. But let's roll it back just a few minutes, like just a half an hour or so ago. We saw Diddy's family, that some of the kids running towards the court entrance to go back into the entrance. The jury was told the court that they could not reach agreement on count 1. That's the first charge. That is the charge of RICO. That's the racketeering charge, which all the legal experts that we've been talking to here on Fox 5 these past weeks and actually a couple months have said that will be the most difficult. It's also the most significant, because that's the one that could send him away for many, many decades. Now, they did say they reached agreement. The jury claimed that they reached agreement. They reached a verdict on the second charge, which is 2 counts of the sex trafficking charge and 2 counts of the transportation for prostitution, which is the 3rd charge. So they've reached agreement on everything except that RICO charge. We don't know what their verdict is on those charges yet, but now both the prosecution and defense, everybody's back in the courtroom right now, which of course we can't be in and we're not allowed to be live in, obviously. But they want both sides, it appears from the latest reporting that we're able to get, that both sides apparently want those, they want them to go back and continue deliberating. So we've heard about these partial verdicts, most recently in a state case with the Weinstein verdict. But let's go right now to criminal defense attorney Seth J. Zuckerman. He's joining us here at our pop-up studio across the street from federal court. And Seth, you just came from the DA's office. You're running around. And when you heard about this in a federal case, that the jury's saying, okay, on day 2 they have a partial verdict, what do you think about that?
Well, Lisa, they had gone hours today without any notes, without anything coming from the jury. And then to hear that they had a partial verdict was a little surprising to me. The judge obviously wanted the input of both parties to decide, well, what do we do next? The racketeering count, RICO count 1 is obviously, as you said, the most serious count that he's facing, but also the hardest for the government to prove in this case. The verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 is not surprising at an earlier phase. And what we're waiting to hear right now is whether or not the judge is going to give the Allen charge, which is a charge you give to a jury when they tell you initially that they can't reach a verdict, and the judge tells them you need to go back and try a little harder. You need to try and persuade your fellow jurors. Now, what I'm hearing is that there were multiple jurors on each side who said that they couldn't be persuaded one way or another, but still it's incumbent upon the judge at this point to give an Allen charge at an appropriate time to encourage the jurors to go back and deliberate more. But what's unclear is whether or not the judge has done that already. What I do know is that he has not taken a partial verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, so we don't know yet what the verdict is on those counts.
So have you ever heard of a partial verdict in a federal case like this?
Oh, yes. Partial verdicts happen all the time. It's incumbent upon the judge, however, not to take the partial verdict immediately and to let the jury complete their deliberations. If at the end of the day the jury is hung and they can't come to a verdict on count 1, he'll take a partial verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. But it happens fairly regularly where they come to a partial verdict and then they get hung on other counts. counts, and then it's up to the prosecution as to whether or not they want to retry that count.
But then does it happen this early on in the deliberations? I mean, we're only at day 2. Yesterday, it seemed like the jury was having trouble, even with the instructions. This morning, things seem to be moving along pretty quickly, then kind of nothing this afternoon. You know, they were getting transcripts and that type of thing going for it. But is it uncommon to have that happen just like on day 2 of deliberations?
Lisa, it's really hard to predict what a jury's doing in the back. As a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, I've sat there for hours and days trying to figure out what a jury's doing back there, and it's impossible to figure out at all times. So is it surprising? No. We obviously don't know the discussions that were going on back there. This is obviously only the second day of deliberations. Yesterday, the jury asked to leave early. That, to me, was a sign that they weren't close to any verdict. Because if they were close to a verdict, they probably would have wanted to stay. But today, they got a full day in. They were deliberating for a number of hours without any interruptions because they had limited notes. And clearly, they reached a partial verdict and decided that they couldn't be persuaded on count 1.
So when they say the terminology, and help us with the terminology so we understand this clearly, when they say they can't be persuaded, is this the same thing as a hung jury, or we just don't know? Like they feel like they've just hit a wall and can't go beyond it?
It's foreshadowing a hung jury. So it's not the judge isn't allowing them to be declared a hung jury quite yet, but this is the first step in a later hung jury. So the judge is giving them more time, encouraging them to go back and try to persuade one another, because like you said, they haven't had that much time back there together. So this is the first step. And if they come back and say, Judge, we really just can't reach a verdict on this count, he has to make a determination along with the parties as what do we do next. He probably will ask them to go back for a number of hours, likely tomorrow, if they say that they can't be persuaded this evening, and then take a verdict probably by the end of the day tomorrow if they say they can't be persuaded, or depending on what the notes say.
Okay, if you're just joining us now, we have breaking news here at the federal court in the RICO sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs. The jury late this afternoon sending a note to the court that they had reached a verdict on counts 2 through 5, which is the 2 counts of sex trafficking and 2 counts of transportation for prostitution across state lines, and that they could not reach any agreement on the RICO count. The judge we're talking about what the judge's options are right now. Both the prosecution and defense indication has been that they want the jury to go back and continue deliberating because it's only day 2. Yesterday we heard that they were having trouble with instructions. This morning they made more requests, and then this afternoon this bombshell announcement that they had reached a verdict that quickly on 2 of the 3 major charges, which contained 4 of the 5 counts that Combs was facing. So that's what's happening here. We're talking about what the possible pathways forward. Seth, let's talk about that. So if you do get a hung jury, can you have a hung jury on one of the charges?
Absolutely. So there can be a hung jury on count 1 and then take a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then it's up to the government as to what they want to do with that charge, or whether or not they want to retry it or not retry Mr. Combs on that count. But that's absolutely possible that they could have a hung jury on 1 count and have a verdict on the other 4 counts. And as you know, we still don't know the verdict on those 4 counts.
Right, exactly.
They could be split on those counts as well. It's probably unlikely at this point, the fact that they came to a verdict at the same time on all 4 of those counts. It's probably the same verdict on each of those 4 counts. But as I said before, with a jury, you just never know.
We really don't know. And then in terms of how long they can go, if the jury says, if the judge says, you know, we want you to go back and continue deliberating, then can they continue deliberating? He told them they could if they want to, past 4 or 5 o'clock.
Yeah, and they could deliberate for another few days. It depends on the notes that they send to the judge. You know, the judge at this point told them to go back and deliberate further, and that I'm not taking a partial verdict at this point. But it could be, they could go back and they could deliberate for a day, 2 days, 3 days after you receive an instruction from the judge. It depends on what notes the jury sends to the judge at this point. They could send a note first thing tomorrow morning saying, we're never going to reach a verdict on this, and then the judge has to decide. But if he doesn't hear back from the jury any further tomorrow or the following day, well, that could also change things.
All right, and obviously the crowd is building outside the courtroom because there's a lot of buzz about this, and there have been a lot of people that are following this case very, very closely. Do you think at this point that the jury they've gone through nearly 2 months of testimony, that they kind of already walked into those deliberations with some idea of what they would find, or is that just too much supposition for us to make at this point?
No, I think that's fair. I've spoken to a lot of jurors over my time in trying cases, and yeah, they generally have an inclination when they walk into the jury room. They do deliberate fairly, but they probably had an idea when they walked back there, and they had a fair discussion with each other about the evidence or lack thereof on the counts. And as all of the legal commentators had predicted, count one was always the most challenging for the government. I'm not surprised that there are jurors who have dug their heels in each direction on count one. It was always a very aggressive charge by the government, and so I'm not surprised to hear that the jurors are having a hard time with that count.
All right, let's check in with our anchors. Bianca, Natasha, any questions from you guys?
Yeah, Lisa, without that RICO charge, how serious are the other charges, and what kind of prison time would Diddy be facing if convicted on charges 2 through 5?
Okay, I'm going to pass that on to Seth right now. So, Seth, Natasha's asking the RICO charges, aside from that, the sex trafficking, 2 counts of that, 2 counts of the transportation for prostitution. What kind of sentences would those carry if he's found guilty of those?
Well, so it's a lesser sentence than the RICO charge, but they still face heavy guidelines. Now, obviously, it's up to the judge at the end of the day, and I'm sure a sentencing would be hard fought, but I don't think we're there yet, right? We don't even have a verdict quite yet.
Right.
There's a partial verdict, and we don't know what that verdict is. But, you know, like I said, the sentence on those charges are less than the RICO charge.
Which is could be decades.
Which could be decades. But I'm sure Mr. Combs still faces a very substantial sentence by the judge under the sentencing guidelines on those counts.
All right, Seth J. Zuckerman, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it and helping us with it. We're reporting live from federal court here, where the jury sent a note saying that they had reached a partial verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs RICO sex trafficking case. We're not quite sure what's been happening the last couple of minutes because we've been out here trying to get the word out, but we'll find out and we'll get back to you with more as this story develops. But I'm going to send it back to the studio to Bianca and Natasha right now. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you so much for that. As Lisa Evers on the ground outside of this courthouse right now as they're continuing to learn what this exactly means. We do have multiple angles of this scene there as a partial verdict has been reached. Let's bring to the conversation right now, friend of the program, former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, thank you so much for joining us. We do know that the note was passed to the judge that they have a verdict on count 2, 3, 4, and 5, not the RICO, the racketeering case. What do you make of what just happened?
Obviously big news, and generally news like this in a complex federal case that could go either way is bad news for the prosecution. Now let's go through the counts. Counts 3 and 5, those are prostitution. Those were always the most readily provable counts. So it's certainly possible that the jurors are not guilty across the board. I would be surprised if we got not guilties on the prostitution, because the defense's argument is that Combs didn't know that these were escorts and he was hiring porn stars to make a homemade porno. Not a particularly good argument, in my opinion. Now, that being said, if that's all the government gets, this will be a huge loss for the Department of Justice. This will go down as the most expensive prostitution trial in American history. So then you're looking at counts 2 and 4. Count 2 is sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. Count 4 is sex trafficking of victim Jane. Those were the harder crimes to prove, in my opinion. So I would be surprised if the jurors were guilty on sex trafficking, but had hung on RICO or racketeering. It's certainly possible, but one of the major components of racketeering is a racketeering act. And we've talked about them. It could be drug trafficking, sex trafficking, can be extortion, can be obstruction, can be bribery, can be arson. But in many ways, because there's different paths to get there, racketeering is an easier charge to prove. So, you know, looking at the possibilities, not guilty across the board is certainly a possibility, although unlikely given the prostitution. Guilty across the board, possible. But again, if they've reached a guilty verdict on sex trafficking and prostitution, they're probably well on their way to guilty on racketeering as well. So what we may be seeing right now, Andy, is a split verdict, not just a partial verdict, a split verdict where we have guilty on the least serious charges, counts 3 and 5, prostitution, also called the Mann Act. We have not guilty on sex trafficking, counts 2 and 4, in which case this entire trial is going to come down to racketeering. Either the jurors will get it together and they'll reach a verdict, in which case it'll completely make or break this trial. The government gets racketeering and prostitution. I think they'll consider that a win. Combs will likely get double-digit years in federal prison. If they get not guilty on racketeering and sex trafficking and just prostitution, we're looking at little to no time, maybe even time served. So that top count is going to be everything. The judge read an instruction, told them to continue deliberating. Hasn't read that Allen charge yet. We know what that is. But I think we'll see today and potentially tomorrow. It's going to decide Combs' future.
Yeah, that is a very good way to explain it, because the RICO, the top charge in this, is so very important. And you kind of dissected the partial jury verdict. We'll see if it is that split verdict, as you mentioned. Let's get into the Allen charge, because the prosecution pushing for this, to trying to find a consensus. How often does that happen in a courtroom?
It's very common. Before a judge instructs a jury and discharges them, they give one last effort. And this is a famous Supreme Court case, aptly called Allen. And there's an instruction that, tells jurors of their duty to deliberate, to keep an open mind, to listen to their fellow jurors, hoping that continued deliberations will reach a verdict. Because if the jury mistrials on count one, then potentially the government can go through this whole process all over and just charge Combs with racketeering. And obviously, that's not going to be a good use of anyone's time. If the jurors, with a few more hours or even a day or two, can get a verdict on that top count, that's going to be in everyone's best interest. But of course, the defense prefers a mistrial and not guilty on sex trafficking, hoping the government won't retry this case.
And I want to ask you, because if they push them back to deliberate more, and no matter how long that goes, if it's just a few hours, a few days, can they talk about the other charges? Are those now counts 2, 3, 4, and 5? Are they off the table completely?
They're not. The judge is going to take one verdict form completed. He's not going to take a partial verdict. They're not going to come and say, okay, well, we're guilty of prostitution or not guilty. It's really an all or nothing situation. Now, of course, the jurors can say, we are hopelessly deadlocked on count one, but we have reached a verdict on counts 2 through 4, in which case the judge will take that verdict. And potentially the judge, it's certainly within his discretion. He can even dismiss count one. We know that Rule 29 motion is still pending. The judge was going to wait until after the jurors returned a verdict. That's, of course, the motion for acquittal that the defense made. So that's certainly possible as well. But I think what would likely happen is, if we do still have that split verdict going tomorrow, the jurors can't make a decision on count one. We'll have a mistrial on count one. Prosecution can retry the case. They may choose not to. And Combs would be sentenced, or at least held in the meantime, on whatever counts the jurors did return a guilty verdict on.
All right, this note coming back with this at least partial verdict at this point. I want to ask you about another note that the jury sent to the judge earlier on today, to ask about testimony from Cassie. And her testimony came several weeks ago, more than a month ago. She was one of the first witnesses to take the stand. And of course, she is the real center point to this whole case for the prosecution. Does that tell you anything about where the jury is viewing this, or is it just a refresher of sorts?
Potentially, those were the first two witnesses to testify, amongst the first. The first was a hotel security guard, but we're talking about Daniel Phillip, who is one of the sex workers. He's the one who infamously was asked to urinate on Cassie Ventura, and obviously Cassie Ventura herself, who testified over the course of 4 days while she was very, very pregnant. That was during the first week of the trial, so maybe jurors just needed a refresher as to what happened. Obviously, she's an important witness, not just for the sex trafficking count 2 that I talked about, but some of the racketeering predicate acts. So things like the extortion, things like the drug distribution, the potential bribery for that hotel security video. So she's obviously the government's star witness. And she ties up a lot of the loose ends here, from prostitution to trafficking to racketeering. So maybe jurors wanted to hear her specific testimony with relation to either counts 2 through 4, or potentially that racketeering. They weren't very specific, so we're not going to necessarily know what they were looking for.
Yeah, you always want to kind of look into the jury room and see what they're kind of going through their minds. And I do want to get more because we're getting some information piecemeal, piece by piece, coming out of this federal courtroom. And of course, Fox News is saying the defense wants to ask the jury at the end of the day tomorrow, rather than now, if they would want to stay over for the third day. The defense does not want the jury to feel rushed or stressed. So we could be in a position similar tomorrow. What do we make of that, and kind of what are the arguments for both prosecution and defense there?
Well, Andy, never underestimate the power of a 3-day weekend to get 12 strangers to return a verdict.
A holiday weekend, nonetheless.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously Friday is the 4th of July. Courts are closed. And if the jurors do need to continue deliberating, they have to come back next week. So the last thing the defense wants here is jurors to feel pressured. We don't know what the split is on count 1. The jurors obviously didn't say that. Is it 1 or 2 holdouts? Can they be proverbially beaten into submission in that jury deliberation room? I mean, we saw in the Harvey Weinstein case where, tempers can flare. There was even a potential physical altercation in that case. If anyone's served as a juror, it can be very frustrating. So obviously, the defense doesn't want anyone to feel that pressure of either time or a weekend or a holiday. They want the jurors to feel comfortable maintaining that position. Strong jurors, holdout jurors, those are defense jurors. Jurors that just go along to get the verdict done. Those are the jurors that the prosecution likes.
All right. And then, of course, we don't know exactly what the verdict entails as of yet. We could have to wait until tomorrow. But I want to ask you, because you talked about the partial verdict, the split verdict, but if there is no decision on that count number 1, the racketeering, the RICO case, do you think the prosecutors will try to have another trial for this one, or do you think they will just move on entirely?
I think they're going to move on because you have a case that's about victims, right? You have Cassie and Mia and Jane who told their stories. And if the jurors didn't believe the sex trafficking, I think that Combs's conduct fits within racketeering, but it is a very broad and aggressive use of the RICO statute. It's primarily used for the mob or organized crime, street gangs, drug cartels. If indeed the sexual contact was consensual, then I don't think the government should prosecute this case. They should accept the jury verdict. And if they were unable to get convictions, whether it's a mistrial or whether it's a straight acquittal on the most serious counts, and all they have is prostitution, kind of reminds me of the Karen Reed case. She's charged with murder and then manslaughter, and they ultimately convicted her of just operating a vehicle while under the influence of alcohol. If you're a prosecutor, you're supposed to really pursue justice and not go after wins, and they should accept the loss and move on. The jury has spoken.
Yeah, and similar to the Karen Reed case, the verdict, it came back and then it went back. So we're in a similar scenario with this high-profile case as well. All right, Neema, I know you got to go, so thank you again for your insight here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks, Andy. Talk to you soon.
All right, thank you so much. All right, great conversation there about all of the latest. Another live picture right now is the jury has reached a partial verdict in this Diddy trial. We're learning more from inside of the courtroom as the jury will be reread a section of the jury charge to emphasize that they must read a verdict. The judge is asking now if the parties would be okay with meeting again on Thursday, the 3rd, if necessary. The defense wants to ask the jury at the end of the day tomorrow, rather than now, if they would want to stay over for another day. The defense doesn't want the jurors to feel stressed or rushed. Neither defense or prosecution objects to meeting on the July 3rd date. Of course, talking about that, a holiday weekend upcoming. And we're also learning that the jury has re-entered the courtroom. The judge will address their note and remind them that they can send a note when they're finished for the day, saying, quote, "I received your note that you have reached verdicts on counts 2 through 5, but not on count 1. I ask this time that you keep deliberating." So they are going to back into that jury room to learn more about this here. So you're just seeing a rainy day in New York City as we're following the very latest. And I want to continue to talk about some of these charges because count number one, that racketeering case, has the most consequences for it in terms of jail time, potentially for this music mogul. I want to put this up here on Live Now from Fox and just read them out to you because we're talking about count number one. That's the RICO, the racketeering conspiracy. Count two is sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. That in relation to Cassie Ventura. Of course, we were watching a lot about that as the jury also asking about testimony from her, the ex-girlfriend, during their relationship in the early 2010s as they talked about the Intercontinental Hotel, that piece of video coming out as they were arguing about it being domestic abuse versus sex trafficking. Count three is transportation to engage in prostitution. Count four, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. This relating to the individual that they called Jane that didn't want to be identified as they're facing that sex trafficking count for the ex-girlfriend accused of coercing her into freak-off parties through similar methods, carries a 15-year life sentence, and also that fifth count, the transportation to engage in prostitution. So those are the 5 counts that the jury was really tasked with finding a verdict on. They appear to have at least a verdict right now on 2 through 5. So not the most important one, not the most damaging one in terms of the racketeering, the RICO case. But we're still following this very closely. A live picture there outside of the courtroom as the judge telling the jury to keep deliberating in this case. He mentioned that the Allen charge, the really genesis behind this, to ask them to try to find at least a consensus one way or another. And that is also at the center of this. The jury has apparently found a verdict, at least a partial verdict. We don't know which way it goes. You heard there from Nima Rahmani, friend of the program, former federal prosecutor, that it could be necessarily split in terms of several of these counts. They found not guilty, several of them finding guilty. The most important one, though, count number one. So we're just going to watch this here. Let's just pull up the audio a little bit and listen into what's going on, because as you imagine, as this news is filtering through social media and the airwaves, people are heading down to this courtroom to see a verdict in person. Let's just listen in briefly here to some of the moments on the ground in the Big Apple. All right, you're just listening into this here on Live Now from Fox. The jury reaching this partial verdict in this Diddy trial. And although a verdict has been reached on counts 2 through 5, deliberations will resume once more on Wednesday. And we will not know exactly what that verdict was, if it was all-encompassing, all guilty, not guilty, or a split verdict in terms of those 2, 3, 4, 5 charges as they are going home for the day. The jury is. They will continue tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. So that is a major development in terms of this case. And like you heard there from Nima Rahmani, they will go back in the jury room and they will continue to deliberate. And counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 still very much on the table in terms of deliberation. They will simply present one jury form, one verdict form to the judge. So those counts still very much up in the air, not solidified, guilty or not guilty, depending on what we're looking at. All right, let's just continue to listen in here. A rainy day, but we'll see if we have anybody stepping out of the courtroom to make some comments. Let's just listen in here to this scene on Live Now. All right, just listening in there as we're following this, kind of dissecting what this all means. And we do have this other angle, as you can see there. This is the area where the supporters of Sean Diddy Combs, some of his children, his relatives, walk out of the courtroom, walk in and out of the courtroom, I should say, on a daily basis, as this has been going on for almost 2 months now. It was 34 different witnesses on the stand, including Cassie Ventura. Of course, that one was part of the testimony they wanted read back to them, parts of what the jury wanted to reevaluate for themselves inside the jury room. That was an earlier note. The more recent note was the major bombshell news that they have reached a partial verdict in this trial. But we do know that deliberations will go on until tomorrow, and they will go on until potentially a verdict is reached, or if they cannot come to a consensus at all. The defense is asking them to really not be stretched or rushed, so they'll ask maybe tomorrow at this similar time if there is a verdict entirely, or if they cannot come to a consensus, if one of the jurors or several of the jurors aren't persuaded into a consensus on that first count, that RICO count. So a major development here, because that count number one is the one with the most weight. As the jury in this sex trafficking and racketeering case, they have reached a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts against the hip-hop mogul. Unable to reach a decision on the top charge, the judge indicated that they would instruct the jury to continue weighing the charge, echoing the sentiment of prosecutors and Combs' defense that just 2 days of deliberations was too soon to giving up on reaching a verdict on all counts. The judge said he received the note around 4:05 p.m. Tuesday, indicating the jury had reached a partial verdict. The note said the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict on the racketeering conspiracy charge because there were jurors that had unpersuadable views on both sides. The judge did not appear keen on having jurors announce their partial verdict without first trying to decide the remaining count. He said the jurors have a right to deliver a partial verdict, but indicated that it's more of a last resort, and that given the short amount of time the panel has been deliberating, he'd rather give them more time and wait for a full verdict. So again, we're just following it here on Live Now from Fox. Some people, maybe reporters, walking out of the courtroom right now as they are the ones delivering all of this information. We do know that there are no cameras inside of the courtroom, so just simply sketches and information, verbatim words and different quotes that we're getting from all of the testimony of these incidents that took place, these alleged incidents on the ground. And of course, I do want to put up just some of these, again, just these charges that we saw, as I want to read them out to you again here in full, talking about these, the counts against the music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. The count one, that racketeering RICO conspiracy, that's the top count. And then sex trafficking, 2 cases of that, 2 and 4. 1 for victim number 1, Cassie Ventura, the ex-girlfriend, and also Jane, the ex-girlfriend referred to as Jane, accused of coercing her into freak-off parties through similar methods, and also you can see there transportation for prostitution. So just several of the counts, and I want to continue to reiterate that because it's an interesting component, a very important component, because you heard from Nima Rahmani that if they cannot come to a verdict on count number 1, if they acquit Sean Diddy Combs on count number 1, it will be a significantly lesser time served, jail time potential for counts 2 through 4. Even if all of those come back as guilty. So still watching this here on Live Now from Fox. Let's just bring up some of the audio and hear what's going on right now on the ground as we're watching and waiting, potentially family members for Diddy, for other members of media to go to it. Actually, let's go out right now as we're following it. Lisa Evers on the ground outside of the courthouse giving another report. Let's listen into this.
Deliberating, not happy at all that they did not, that they reached this partial verdict and not on the other charge. He said you need to continue deliberating. He said tomorrow morning when the jury returns, instead of going into the courtroom and having the kind of procedural things that they usually do at the start of the day before they're sent to the jury deliberations room, he said you go straight to the jury deliberations room. Now, if this is the first that you're hearing of this and you're joining us right now here on Fox 5 and on Fox 5 digital affiliates, the most important thing to understand is about almost an hour ago at this point, the jury sent a note to the court that they had reached a verdict on 4 of the 5 charges that Diddy is facing in this case. The notes were passed, discussions were held, the defense and the prosecution both saying that they wanted the jury to continue deliberating. Now, the charge that they were unpersuadable about, that was a term that was used and divided on, was that most important number 1 charge, the RICO, the racketeering charge, that if found if Combs was found guilty of that, would send him away for possibly decades, if not life. So they'll be back again tomorrow morning to continue the deliberations. Tomorrow is only day 3 of these deliberations. Now, we have some experts with us right now here to try to break this all down. Joining me is Faye Honig. She's a consultant. She's also president of the American Society of Trial Consultants. Faye, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Also with us is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Seth J. Zuckerman. Seth, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Seth, in terms of where things stand now, the judge telling them, go back and, go home, come back, don't talk to anybody, go straight to, don't pass go straight to the jury deliberation room tomorrow morning. What do you make of this, of what is happening here?
So this is fairly common. So at this point, the jury has indicated to the judge and the parties that they've reached a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts and that they are hung on count 1, which is the most serious count, the RICO racketeering count. Obviously, the jury and the public have not learned, the judge and the public have not learned what that verdict is quite yet. So we're waiting to hear what the verdict is on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the judge is asking them to deliberate further on count 1. Now, he sent them back to the jury room this evening to deliberate further, but they sent a note asking to go home, and he has sent them home and said to come back tomorrow morning and continue your deliberations as soon as you get back to court tomorrow. And I expect that there'll be a note fairly quickly from the jury, one way or another, whether or not they're still hung on count 1 or have a readback.
You mean tomorrow, you think?
Tomorrow, yeah.
Right.
I expect that they'll deliberate and then have a note fairly quickly about which way the jury is going on count 1.
And Faye, you've consulted on many big trials and these federal trials. What about this partial verdict and this coming so soon? Like, this is only day 2 of deliberations. How unusual is that?
I mean, you honestly never really know how a trial is going to go. These jurors have clearly been paying attention. They've asked numerous questions. The first question came pretty quickly yesterday. It was almost about an hour in. So you never really know how it's going to be, and each trial is different. But we've seen these partial verdicts before. We just saw it happen in Weinstein. We kind of always knew that the number 1 charge is going to be the most complicated one. So it's not that surprising that, like you said, that's the one they're hung up on.
And then Seth, in terms of their options when they go back, do they have to redecide these charges, these counts that they already said they reached a verdict on, or do they just focus right on that 1 RICO charge?
The entire deliberations now is on count 1. Counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 have a verdict, and they will give that verdict to the court at the appropriate time. But right now, the entire deliberation is for count 1 on the RICO racketeering charge, and they will give any further notes to the court as to where they're going with their verdict when they come back tomorrow.
And then
or if they even reach a verdict, of course.
Right, if they reach a verdict
they may
tomorrow.
be hung on count 1.
But that's the one thing that they have. And then, Seth, in terms of if it's a hung jury, or if they come back and say, end of tomorrow, we can't come to any agreement on this, what happens then?
So the judge did not give an Allen charge, which is what's known as a charge that you give to a jury when they indicate that they're hung and that they need more time to deliberate. And the judge gives them, basically tells them that they need to work together, try to persuade one another to come to a verdict, that he doesn't want it to be a hung jury. So he did not give them an Allen charge quite yet. What he did is he gently told them that they needed to work better together. It was short of an Allen charge, as we call it, but I anticipate if there's a note tomorrow telling the court that there is no verdict and that they are still hung, I imagine that there'll be a formal Allen charge at some point tomorrow.
And Faye, this jury, they're very diverse backgrounds, very diverse, a lot of diversity, different types of backgrounds, different educational levels. Does that present an element of complexity when they're trying to deliberate and come to agreement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what I was saying weeks ago, right? Like, it doesn't even matter who the individual person is, but it also matters about group dynamics. So this jury is very diverse, and we're seeing that in deliberations. We already saw a note about one juror that they were concerned couldn't follow the instructions. They're now, clearly hung up on these charges. There's clearly a group, or at least one person in there, that is vehemently against the other side. So the group dynamics really are making this a very interesting deliberation.
And then, Seth, in terms of just the tensions and the pressures on the attorneys, like at this point, if you're put your prosecutor hat on, if you're the prosecutors, what are you worried about?
The prosecutors are worried that they have a hung jury on count 1. It was obviously always an aggressive charge that a lot of us in the legal community thought was a little too far.
A bridge too far.
Correct. And they're worried that the jury has indicated that they have jurors on each side who have dug their heels in and are not willing to reach a verdict because they feel strongly one way or the other about their position. So I think as a prosecutor, you're concerned about that, but you also know that you've got a verdict on 4 of the counts. They obviously don't know what the verdict is yet, but I think the prosecutors feel pretty comfortable about the 4 other counts, but they don't feel comfortable about the RICO racketeering count.
And then, Faye, what about the fact that they reached an agreement on these 4 counts so quickly? Is there any prevailing wisdom or conventional wisdom in the jury and trial consultant community that says if it's that fast, it may indicate one thing or the other?
You know, I'm sure both sides kind of have their view. It's kind of difficult to guess what the jury's thinking. Like I said, the only insight we really have are the juror notes that they're bringing to the court. So I don't want to make an educated guess, but I feel like a lot of us have a thought about which way it's going to go.
Which way it's going to go. Seth, what about that? If you're the defense attorneys and you're hearing that there's a verdict on 4 of the 5 this quickly, what are you thinking?
I mean, I think it's really hard as a defense attorney to know that there's a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts and not learn what it is. They all have to go to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow morning without learning what the verdict is. And as a defense attorney, that's really hard because you don't know. It's out of your control, and you don't know what that verdict is. So I don't think that they feel great tonight, knowing that there is a partial verdict on those 4 counts, and they don't know what that verdict is.
And maybe a lot of sleepless nights on both sides. I want to thank both of you for being with us, trial consultant Faye Honig and criminal defense attorney Seth J. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
People are going a little. It's getting a little hectic out here, but we'll throw it back to you.
All right, you're just listening in there to Lisa Evers and the crew on the ground, and you can just see the scene behind them as they are watching and waiting right now as the jury has gone home for the day. This is a live look outside of the courthouse right now there as we're following it here on Live Now from Fox. Let's continue our conversation as we monitor this and bring into the conversation right now TMZ executive producer, friend of the program, Michael Babcock. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We expected the unexpected, but I don't know if anybody saw this coming. The jury going to go home for the day. They reached a partial verdict. What are your thoughts?
No, yeah, same thing, Andy. I mean, you know, obviously we've seen they've not been shy about sending notes to the judge, and you know, it starts to get later in the day. It was about 4:05 p.m. Eastern time when this note was sent to the judge. Only this time it wasn't necessarily about an issue they were having with any of the other jurors, but to tell the judge, hey, we have reached, as Lisa and the 2 experts there said, that they had reached the verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. But we're at this point deadlocked on count 1. So the question was then, would we get a verdict? Would we not get the verdict read? And obviously, after conferring with the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, the judge made the decision that we're going to send them home for the day. We're going to get back here tomorrow morning, first thing, 9 a.m., and let's get back in that room. And again, let's try and reach a verdict on count 1, which, as people may know, is the most serious. It potentially carries the longest prison sentence. So they want a verdict on count 1 on the racketeering charge. We don't know what the verdict is on 2, 3, 4, and 5. We do know, obviously, though, that we're talking about, you know, essentially what's, you know, sex trafficking and taking a prostitute across state lines. So there's a verdict there. Is it guilty? Is it not guilty? I think we probably all have our guesses. I would think it's pretty quick for them to come back with a not guilty, but that's just reading the tea leaves.
Yeah, we'll see what happens tomorrow as they return at 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern. And then hopefully by the end of tomorrow, we're not in the same position and they will take that potentially partial verdict. And we'll see if it's a split verdict as well. But if this jury does not come back with a count on that first count, the RICO charge, do you think the prosecution has any choice to retry this case? Because that is a potential possibility, plenty of obstacles, challenges. We saw logistics of it all. Do you think that is any part of reality?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a Herculean effort to think about going through this, even not necessarily on all 5 counts, but even partially again, Andy, and it's taken so long, so much money and resources. It's daunting to think about. And I know a lot of people watched this trial and listened to the testimony and thought, Diddy's a bad guy. He's a horrible boyfriend. He's a domestic abuser. But I don't know that he's running a criminal organization. And I don't know that he has met the different aspects that are needed to end up coming back with a guilty verdict on a racketeering charge. And if this jury is unable to come back with the verdict, I think that just gets reinforced even further. So would they retry the RICO charge? I think that's a great question. I'm not so sure that the answer is yes.
And we talked yesterday because I asked if we got a not guilty on all the counts, what would it look like if we got a guilty on all the counts. You'd be behind bars for quite a long time. How is Los Angeles? How is Hollywood? How is the music industry viewing this? Are they really tuned in to see what happens?
Yeah, I think everybody is, Andy. Just like, you know, even when we heard that there was a verdict that had come down, you just feel that there's a buzz. I mean, this has been despite no cameras in the courthouse, this has been a case that people have really been in tune with and followed. So I think that you've got a lot of people that are following very closely because they're just interested, but also because Diddy is, after 3-4 decades, in the spotlight, knowing these other celebrities. I think you've got a lot of people who just know this guy on a personal level and are really interested in seeing what's going to happen to him. And some people who might have partied with him over the years and have got a little bit of, concern for selfish reasons. But absolutely, I think people are very much in tune with what's happening here and very eager to hear this verdict when it is ultimately read.
All right, I think you can see some of his family members walking out because they've had so much support behind Diddy during this case. Michael, my last question before I let you go. Are we going to have a verdict tomorrow? Is that what you're feeling?
I feel like, yeah. I think it's going to happen. They want to get this out of the way. They want to get it done before the holiday weekend. Maybe I'm being hopelessly optimistic here, Andy, but I feel like, yeah, we're going to get a verdict.
All right, we'll see where we stand tomorrow. The jury deliberations resume after they're pushing really to have it more. All right, Michael, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Andy.
All right, thanks so much. All right, great conversation there as always. As we all thought a verdict might be read today, that is not the case, as we will regroup tomorrow morning to see what happens. As you can see the live picture right now outside of the courthouse, a rainy day, umbrellas, different ponchos. Right now, we did see several members of his family on hand for this. And you can imagine as the jury sends notes to the judge, you don't know if it is a note about testimony. You don't know if it's a note about a verdict being reached, which this last one was, but a little bit of a false flag, a false alarm of sorts, at least halfway, as the jury just reaching a verdict on counts 2 through 5. They will resume deliberations tomorrow on that most crucial and pressing charge, the RICO charge. And again, I'm just going to put this up here on Live Now from Fox of what these charges certainly entail, as you can see the blueprint, the manila folder of what they are, talking about racketeering, sex trafficking, 2 counts, that's 2 and 4, the even counts, Cassie Ventura and Jane, the sex trafficking of those 2 potentially individuals, and then also transportation to engage in prostitution. Of course, this all comes back to forced fraud, of course, and coercion in this case. But again, just a live picture outside of the courthouse. Let's just listen in briefly here on Live Now from Fox to the Big Apple, see if we have any other family members stepping out of the courthouse, as they likely some sleepless nights ahead for them, for Diddy, for the defense, prosecution. So many people will watch and wait to see what happens with this. So let's just listen in briefly to this here on Live Now from Fox. You can hear the rain beating down on some of these umbrellas, those cameras picking it up, those microphones picking it up so succinctly, as potentially we might see more people walking out of this courthouse, different reporters inside of that. We've spoken to Fox 5 reporter Lisa Evers almost daily about some of the proceedings taking place inside of this federal courthouse, those sex trafficking, racketeering case, as all of these people in adjacent rooms monitoring what's going on, seeing the body language of Diddy, the music mogul, facing these serious charges relating to sex trafficking and racketeering. Of course, the conspiracy that is, as we have now reached a partial verdict in this case. So a lot of anticipation on what's to come tomorrow, as the judge telling the jury to go back and deliberate more. Deliberations continue on, saying just this, just over 24 hours. They deliberated for 5-some hours yesterday, almost a full day today, saying they did not have could not persuade the entire group. They could not find a consensus for this. So if you're just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, a little bit of a refresher of sorts in this case, a very high-profile crime case, a case out of New York City involving Sean Diddy Combs, as we know that the jury has reached a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts, but the judge pushing the jury, those 12 members, to go back and deliberate some more. So they will resume inside of the courthouse one more time there in New York City. The outcome of any of the charges not yet clear. The judge told the jury to hold off announcing its partial verdict and instead continue weighing the remaining charge. Like the prosecutors, the defense team reasoned that after 2 days of deliberations, it was too soon to give up on reaching a verdict on all counts. The development came late on Tuesday when the jury sent a note saying it was unable to reach a unanimous verdict on the racketeering conspiracy charge because the jurors had unpersuadable views on both sides. So you can see right now walking out of the courtroom, I believe this is another member, a family member of Sean Diddy Combs there. Let's just listen in and see if we have any reaction. All right, you're just hearing there some of the comments saying free Diddy and other comments to family members of Sean Diddy Combs here. So we're just monitoring it here. Plenty of support, the support system there fully behind him, although some of the images, some of the testimony was very graphic. Let's bring in right now to the conversation another friend of the program, legal analyst Trey Lavelle. Trey, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And all of these developments, very fluid, very dynamic. They have reached a partial verdict, 2 through 5. What do we make of this? Explain it to our audience.
Well, it is a surprise. And when you reach a verdict this quickly, it's one of two things has happened. Either it's a slam dunk case and the jury didn't feel the need to go days and days into deliberations, or it's a horrible case and they didn't see anything there. There's no there, and they're coming out with not a conviction. So in this case, because of the expediency, it seems like they have reached some type of convicted status for Sean Diddy Combs. So it's just a matter of whether or not that 5th gonna line up. But the fact that they have unanimous decisions on 4 of the counts would lead me to believe that they are towards a conviction, because to get 4 non-guilties would be tough. Unanimous non-guilties would be tough under these facts.
Yeah, that is a good way to put it. And we spoke to Nima Rahmani saying it potentially could be a split verdict as they read this verdict out. I do want to ask you, because the judge, the prosecution, the defense all seemed in consensus for them that this was not enough time for the jury to really say they're through with it. It's a last resort to say that they cannot persuade, not have a unanimous one way or the other on that first charge. Do you agree with them?
I do. You know, it's only been a couple of days. And you want to try to reach a consensus on all the counts. Because if any part of the counts is hung, that means you may be susceptible to a retrial. And neither the prosecution nor defense wants to retry this case. So they do want some closure on it no matter what. That's why it's so important to try to get a decision on this last count, you know, either yay or nay, so that the trial's over, subject to the appeals, of course.
And I want to ask you, and I just want to reiterate it, because count number 1 is the most important, the most crucial case count for this entire case. If he is found not guilty versus guilty, can you talk about the contrast in the sentencing? How much more time would he spend behind bars if he is found guilty on the first count versus if he is found not guilty?
So under racketeering, it could be life in prison. You know, and so that's a very serious count. The sex trafficking counts, I think, are a minimum of 15 years. So, you know, they're up there as well, but not quite life unless you kind of stack them. The transportation to engage in prostitution counts, they're a maximum of 10 years. So him being a first-time offender, that could be a 2 or 3 year sentence, depending on what it is. So, you know, it certainly could add a significant more amount of jail time, prison time, if the racketeering claim is found to be a conviction.
All right, very good. And I also asked this of Nima Rahmani, but if they go back in the deliberation room like they will tomorrow morning, can they can they re-deliberate some of those other counts, or is that off the table?
No, up until the time the jury verdicts are read and entered into the record, they can be changed. They can be modified. And although that usually does not happen, it could. And so nothing is set in stone. You know, the decisions on these other 4 counts have not been given to the judge, read into the record, and are susceptible to being amended or changed. And so that's an option. But I think they're probably going to stand as they are, and it's going to be the focus on that 5th count, and then either the jury's going to be able to make a decision or not, and it'll probably happen tomorrow.
All right, very good. And we'll all keep our eyes on that. Some sleepless nights for some of those people, defense, prosecution, Diddy, the jury, all of those parties involved. Let's take me back to the Allen charge a little bit, as the judge pushing and urging the jury to deliberate some more. Has this happened in other high-profile cases? Is this a common act?
It is a common act. So what happens is, it's not unusual for, in a multi-count indictment, for the jurors to make some decisions on some counts and not be able to come up with a decision on others, or just be hung on it, altogether on all of them. So what the court tries to do is, an Allen charge is basically reminding the jury of their civic duty to try to enter a decision, to try to come to a decision. Make sure that it's your own. You don't want to be coerced. You don't want to be persuaded by others, through distress or anything like that. But you want to be open. If you have a majority and they have a certain, consensus, as a minority, you want to listen to them, see if they're making sense. Be open. Be able to discuss, the issues more, even though you may feel that they're done. Do everything you absolutely can to come up with a final verdict. It's very important. But do so short under coercion. Do so short where, it's anything that's not your own decision. No matter what, even if it's hung, even if you can't decide, it needs to be your own decision. But this is the last chance. An Allen charge, or a dynamite charge, as it's often referred to, is really the last chance to get a hung jury to come up with a decision.
Yeah, something to potentially spark them into making a decision. And we also talked about the fact that this upcoming weekend is a holiday weekend, an extended weekend. There is no guarantee that we see this verdict tomorrow. How persuasive can that extended weekend be? And could we see this even continue past?
I think the chances of it extending beyond this weekend are slight. I think the fact that we have a decision within 2 days on 4 counts means that we're on track to get this case wound up probably tomorrow. They're going to come back to resume deliberations tomorrow morning. It's going to be about that 5th count, and they're going to give it a shot. And at some point, either they're going to say, "Hey, Your Honor, we have come to a unanimous decision on all counts," or it's like, "Your Honor, we're forever hung. We're not going to be able to decide no matter what," and that's really going to be our final decision. And at that point, if it's the latter, the judge they'll come in, they will enter the 4 counts, and the judge will then deem that 5th count to be hung.
And if that potentially does happen, we're talking about, like we said, the most important, the most crucial, most pivotal case in terms of this, the racketeering case. If they try to retry this case, what type of effort, because there were so many challenges, so many logistics in it, do you think the prosecution will even try?
If they're successful on getting convictions on 1 or more of the other counts, whether it's split or whether, it's unanimous on the 4, on all of the 4, I don't think they're going to go for a retrial if the 5th count on racketeering is hung. It's a complicated count. It's tough to win on. And there would be, a victory, with the prosecution if they get some conviction on these other counts. So depending on what it is, if they get maybe guilty on 1 count of transportation to engage prosecution, maybe they won't want to do a retrial, but I doubt it. I think the fact that there's unanimity on 4 counts, and we're anticipating 1 or more to be a conviction, that's probably going to be enough. I don't think they would want to retry the racketeering claim.
All right, before we fast forward tomorrow, let's rewind a little bit, because we saw that note come down talking about the partial verdict reached by the jury. Earlier on in the day, the jury did send a note asking for more testimony from when Cassie Ventura, the ex-girlfriend of Diddy, was on the stand. And we saw the video from that Intercontinental Hotel as the jury was asking for this. And she was one of the first people to testify in this. Do we read into anything from that? The jury wanting to hear more from Cassie, wanting to see more from what Cassie said in her perspective. Do you think that was an influence on the jury?
You know, I think that's pretty telling. I think the fact that they wanted a transcript of Cassie's testimony means they're really focusing on her testimony, exactly what she said. Probably, and this is just speculation, obviously, trying to decide whether or not it was really consensual and she was really into this lifestyle or she was being coerced. And by looking at the specific testimony and her own words, you know, which had happened early in the trial, so they may have forgot a lot of it, that may have helped make that decision. But certainly when you ask for a specific piece of testimony, and it really shows that the jury is focusing on that. Now, above and beyond that, it's speculation in terms of how they're using it, or or the real backdrop. But I think most people would believe that Cassie's testimony and Cassie's appearance in this is extremely important, if not the main testimony and the main evidence for the prosecution. So I'm not surprised that they want to revisit that to know exactly what she said.
All right, that is so very interesting. And before we get to this verdict, either there's a hung charge on that count number one, if there's a split verdict, if there's different things that happen, what does the appeals process look like? Because as we talked about, this was such a complicated case, such a burdensome case. Does the appeals process follow a similar pattern where it's very burdensome?
Oh, well, there will certainly be an appeal if there's a conviction. I think the judge has been pretty good in this case in terms of the evidentiary decisions he's allowed, what to let in, what not to let in, and they've tried to keep it down the line. But there certainly will be some appellate issues. Matter of fact, I'm sure they have an appellate attorney watching the trial as it was going, to lining up those issues. So there's always going to be an appeal. But the judge did a pretty good job. I didn't see any evidentiary issues that were loudly questionable that people were jumping on.
All right, very good. Trey, thank you so much for breaking it all down. Jury deliberations presumed tomorrow at 9 a.m. Any other thoughts before I let you go?
Not really. I think it's going to be decided tomorrow. Probably a conviction on at least one or more of those other counts. And then we'll see what the sentence is going to be like. But it's a quick disposition to a long trial. Surprising, yet this is our justice system.
Yeah, very good. We'll see what happens. Innocent until proven guilty. We'll see what that verdict says tomorrow. Trey, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks so much. All right, great conversation there. As always, a live picture outside of this courthouse as the deliberations will resume one more time in New York City in this music mogul, this major high-profile case there, as we're detailing it here on Live Now from Fox since that happened. All right, let's continue on here on Live Now. And as we do sometimes, we have to shift gears very, very quickly. Let's take you now out to Los Angeles as we're seeing this live picture of a stolen vehicle pursuit in Los Angeles. As you can see there on this I-10 highway westbound, going at about 50 or 60 miles an hour, the stolen police chase involving a stolen car in East Los Angeles. We'll see if our Fox 11 team dives into this this broadcast of this. But as we're just following it 40 to 50 miles an hour, we did see police vehicles behind this individual right now. So we're just still gathering so much information from East Coast to West Coast right now. You can see them zooming in on this individual in this sedan, this vehicle. Not exactly what sure he's doing. You can see potentially almost looked like he was using his turn signal as well. So that would be an unusual thing in a police chase, and almost getting passed by other vehicles here in the central city area on the 10. So we're just following it very closely. Let's just keep our eyes on this here on Live Now from Fox. All right, so we're just still following this, only about 55 to 60 miles an hour, right within the speed limit. So you don't see any black and white vehicles, any police, California Highway Patrol right behind them, but now upwards of 70 miles an hour. They sometimes hang back and see what happens. You can see the camera freezing here just briefly there. The I-10 in East Los Angeles. You can see Los Angeles Street, downtown LA, and this potentially could have been one of the areas where protesters were blocking. Now weaving to the left, potentially taking an exit of sorts. So we monitor all of these things happening and make sure everyone's safe. You can see they're passing a bus as it's 3 o'clock, just past 3 o'clock right now. School likely not in session, but you can imagine some camps for kids, people taking summer school. That is a concern here. Weaving in and out of traffic, this silver sedan, not exactly sure the make or the model, but right now we're just understanding that is a police chase involving a potentially stolen vehicle. The suspect or suspects in the car. We only can see one person from this angle right now, but there might be more people in the car as well, as they were going from the far left lane now all the way to the far right lane, weaving in and out of traffic. And not exactly sure where police are, but you can see that a little bit of a fork in the road, if this is an exit or if this is just an interchange to a different highway. I believe you just saw a police vehicle there behind them, moving at about the same speed as they're now at 40. This looks like it's an off-ramp, an exit ramp of sorts. You can see the helicopter shadow. That could be a police helicopter also monitoring it. They will get help from the aerial assets of the law enforcement to see where this individual goes. You can see just how many different places or roads intersect at this exact location, the comings and goings of a major metropolitan area, just ahead of rush hour, now almost on the shoulder there, making this exit. We haven't seen this individual make any really rash decisions in terms of high speeds or weaving in and out too much, but just on the right lane right now, moving through traffic through the Pasadena area, if you're familiar there, near downtown East LA in this area. The highest speeds I think I saw was the 70s, so not going super fast right now, but we also want to make sure and note that viewer discretion is advised when some of these events happen. Some of these police chases, not a high-speed police chase right now, happens because they can turn in an instant and they can be catastrophic at a moment's notice because individuals fleeing police obviously can make those decisions that are unfortunate. But now exiting onto the downtown area, you don't know if that's a West 8th Place, James Wood Boulevard, what they're going to do, take a left or a right. But as we've talked about, as we've watched different police chases happening, sometimes they go back to areas that they are familiar. Now jammed there between cars. We'll see if police come up behind them and try to corner this individual in this area as they're stopped at a traffic light right now, trying to play a little bit coy, unaware, unassuming of what's going on. So just at this light, waiting for it to go red, even a motorcycle going right by them. So the cameraman is actually focusing on that motorcycle to see if you can see if it was a police vehicle or not, a California Highway Patrol. Sometimes those motorcycle cops are also in tune, in communication with what's going on here in the downtown Los Angeles area. So this one has come to a stop just due to the traffic signals of the Los Angeles metropolitan area in Southern California. Not turning left, going straight through this light, making his way to the right. Still don't see any police behind him. That might have been a good opportunity. He was sitting there still for 20 to 30 seconds, not going anywhere, didn't really have an exit or anywhere to get in or out. So police not in sight right now. They're zooming in to see if there's any other individuals, to see if this is a California license plate. That is also a component. They can run the plates and see who this is associated with. We do know that reports that is a stolen vehicle. So we don't know exactly where it is stolen from, but there, South Figueroa, that a very important, popular portion of downtown Los Angeles, moving through this high-rise area, and it kind of goes behind some of these buildings. So this is also a way they try to elude law enforcement right now of this stolen vehicle. As you can see, coming to this intersection, 9th and Hope, it looks like it still went through. They have eyes on it right now of this pursuit. So very slow pursuit. We'll see if we have police trying to corner this person. There are lots of ways. You can see there the signage that says to the I-10, to the 110, just to the right. We'll see if he takes this right and heads back on the highway or goes straight through. I believe this is on Grand Avenue right there, but continues to go on. But this is a very residential area. Not sure if they're going to try to get out to flee on foot from this, or if this is just another traffic stop there in downtown LA. And as anyone has driven in Los Angeles, you know there is traffic at all points of the day, no matter rush hour or not. So we're just watching and waiting. Still no signs of any black and white vehicles, no police, law enforcement necessarily in pursuit in a close proximity to this individual, but now coming up on a bus at a traffic stop. So again, just slightly obeying the rules of the road, although this is a report of a stolen vehicle in downtown Los Angeles. So following this closely, our Fox 11 team not currently in this right now on their air. They're gathering all the information they can, trying to figure it out. They usually have a good sense of some of these roads, some of the thoroughfares, the corridors that come and go to different highways, because there are just a web of interchanges in downtown Los Angeles to get to further Southern California, the Inland Empire, more out west and north, but downtown now moving at about 20 miles an hour. Not exactly sure what this individual is looking at right now in the helicopter, but we're still just monitoring. Reports of a stolen vehicle in Los Angeles, so they zoom out. They might have lost this individual. So we're just following it. We'll see. That's what happens sometimes is they kind of lose their place, try to figure out their bearings, their understanding of where it's going on. They're putting up the map to see some of the streets, the grid of downtown Los Angeles. You can see Wall Street there, San Pedro, other different major streets, avenues, and boulevards. But they may have lost this individual because I bet he blends in very well with the surrounding traffic, not going in and out of traffic, not crossing over yellow lines, not really speeding in any sort of way. So I don't believe that's the silver vehicle they were looking for. So we could have lost him. Police may have done the same. Police might also be on their tail. We'll see if they have any understanding, if they can kind of piece this together, find this mystery out, and see if they can find this individual once more. All right, let's slide away for a quick 2-minute break as they hopefully try to find this vehicle. We'll dive back into coverage. Plenty of breaking news here on Live Now from Fox, from West Coast to East Coast. That's what we do, just past 3 o'clock on the West Coast, 6 o'clock on the East Coast. Still monitoring this shot out of New York. The Sean Diddy Combs trial will continue into Wednesday. The jury has reached a partial verdict. They'll come back and deliberate some more on that important count number 1, the racketeering conspiracy charge. I'm Andy Mack. We're back after